Okay, after graduating from here, I applied and got accepted at the Royal College of Art to study an MA in photography. I arrived at the Royal College of Art having very little idea about what I wanted to do, but having pitched the idea that I wanted to look back at the period of time I'd spent in the army and do some work around it. Part and parcel of doing that was to start thinking about what it was like to be in the army and why, what was the motivation for me to join the army in the first place. And as I said earlier on, that came from a whole variety of sources. So it was the fantasy element that I've already discussed, but there was more to it really than that. And it was that influx of information that I was receiving from a whole range of sources like games. At the time, computer games was really starting to come into their own. PlayStation launched its first PlayStation game on PlayStation console around then. So war games started coming into existence and being moved from just literally drips and drops and lumps on the screen and suddenly becoming a little bit more real. The Gulf War as well was quite a dominant feature in my work, and the history of the Gulf War played a big part in the formation of the ideas for this, in that it was sold to us as a fantasy war, the first one anyway. It was sold to us in such a way that we would watch something on television and it was presented from a sort of very mediated perspective, in that you would see it as a game. They would put cameras on the front of nose cones of missiles which would be dropped onto pinpoint targets, and there would be great bangs and whooshes and celebrations when you actually hit a tank or something that you assumed was the enemy target. But for me, experimenting in that area, looking at work in that area and ideas that surrounded that area, I found slightly problematic, because as a child that's not the way I played. The way I played was with my brothers. I've got two brothers, both of which joined the army. And we used to go out into the woods and we used to pull out our toy guns. We used to shoot our cap guns at each other. We'd all lie down on the floor dead, and then we'd be reincarnated as some sort of a mortal hero. And I wanted to try and find a way of putting that across in my work, that sort of innocent child play. But I also thought about the way that we used to play training in the army, if you call it play. Because of course we didn't shoot each other very often. We tended to use blank rounds. So you'd get a little black armband if you were killed. So you'd be out of the game for half an hour, or your little squad would be put aside because you were injured or hurt or something. So it was all this sort of fantasy role play that you were playing out. And it sort of desensitized you from the idea of actually going into battle and the prospect of being injured in some way. So this work was a reaction to that. And the way I put across the idea of this immortal hero was to use the multiple, which was the first time that I'd tried experimenting in that way. I was lucky at the Royal College of Art in that they had about a dozen computers there. And when I said I wanted to learn Photoshop, they went out and found someone called Suki Best to train me, who was someone who knew what Photoshop was, how to use it very well. So she used to come in and teach about 3 of us on a weekly basis how to use this program. So I was able to learn the techniques and skills that I needed to know to be able to create this work. So this work was shot in a very simplistic way. I'd have a tripod, I'd put a camera on top of the tripod, I would shoot the images so the frame wouldn't change, and I would then scan in the images because they were all shot on 35mm, and then they would be layered back together again. And initially I would start off like an image of this, like this one, of the people walking into the mist, where there would be separate elements, so I wouldn't have to overlap them. And as time went by, I would turn it into a mass of people, so there'd be more overlapping, more interactions. And part of this, and part of the theme behind this, was the idea of the sort of loss of identity that you get when you're in the army. A lot of the titles that are used in the army, Brothers in Arms, part of a regiment, or just giving you a serial number, enhanced that idea that you were one of a unit rather than an individual. For example, there was about 5 Smiths in my regiment, and my name was Paul Smith. There was 2 Paul Smiths there. So they decided to change my name, and I became known as Smith 900 for most of the time in the army. So when I was called out a parade or anything else, it would always be referred to as Smith 900. So it really, really dehumanized you. Something that I was, again, hoping to get across in the work. Now, I thought about the presentation of the work. Now, the presentation of the work was very important to me. And I went to the Imperial War Museum. I looked at the way that they were showing documentary photography at the time. And they were tending to buy big, dark oak frames, put window mounts in them, and then they would have large-scale colour prints and present them in that sort of format. So I echoed that method of presentation in my final degree show. I couldn't afford to do massive prints, so I actually put in my degree show just 2 massive prints, and then I had a series of smaller prints in the exhibition. But I was standing at the front reception, or sitting with a friend of mine called Tom Hunter at the front reception of my MA show, when a guy walked up to the front desk, and in his hand he had a little postcard, and he said, "Oh, I'm interested in buying some of this work." And Tom said, "Oh, this is Paul's work." So I walked down the corridor with him blabbing away about what the work was about and the ideas behind the work. Eventually he said to me, "Well, let me introduce myself." And he said, "My name's Charles Saatchi." This guy next to him was Martin Maloney. If you haven't heard of the guy Charles Saatchi, I'll be surprised, but he was the collector of the time of this period. He shaped the whole art world. He started off people like Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, Rachel White, Reed Gavin Turk, sort of household names. He changed from being students to becoming established household names. Or at least his patronage did help along that way. So he walked along, saw my end work, said, "I like it." After telling him a little bit about the work, he then said, "All right, I want to buy some." And I said, "Well, which do you want?" And he said, "Well, actually, I want to buy it all." So he immediately bought my whole degree show out. He bought 13 pictures at that point. And he also said, "I want them all big size." So the large-scale prints that I showed in my degree show, he bought of those. So 13 large-scale prints. And then if you find yourself in this situation, one thing that I learned very, very quickly from working with the Saatchi Gallery, working with the Royal College of Art, and working with some of the students here, is you've got to monopolise on that really, really quickly. So we made sure that the press knew about it. We made sure that rumours got out really, really quickly that this has happened before the degree show had even finished. And as a direct response, by the time the degree show ended, I was spending most of my time showing my work to collectors, negotiating with collectors and selling off the work, to the point where I cleared my whole debt from all of my time at college in one day. The next day I managed to buy a top-of-the-range Mac computer and all the equipment I needed to continue working. So opportunities there, but if the opportunities arrive, you've got to sort of grasp them really quickly and make sure you know how to deal with them, and deal with them in a really professional manner. So the RCA was clearly a massive influence on my work, and if you're thinking of going on to postgraduate study, I would highly recommend looking at the RCA. But when you look at the RCA, don't just think about what the college is. Think about who will be there. Some of these people won't be there, the work I'm showing now. They were the staff when I was there. The top left-hand picture is an image by David Hiscox, and he was probably the person who influenced me most in choosing the Royal College of Art. I loved his work as a student. I was very, very inspired with it, and when I found out that he was one of the lecturers there, I went there, and when I got there, I asked for him to be my personal tutor, and he was for the first year of study for me. Moving around to the right, someone who, I think it was the Citibank or the Dorsch Prize, whatever it's called now, Anna Fox. She arrived in my second year as one of the lecturers then. Bottom left-hand side is an image by someone called Peter Kennard, who's still, I think, second in charge of the course at the RCA. And on the bottom right-hand side, we've got a piece of work by Helen Chadwick. If you're not familiar with Helen Chadwick's work, it might be worth looking up. She's not just a photographic artist, she's a multimedia artist, but Helen Chadwick was the first woman to be nominated for the Turner Prize, and one of the very first few people who were nominated on the grounds predominantly of her photographic work. But she created some amazing images, and she was one of my support tutors, and she was the one who spent a lot of time discussing with me in my first year about the ideas that were embodied in the work that came through, obviously, in the Army series. It's not only the staff that inspire you there. If you're lucky enough to study alongside some great people. That will help. And the RCA was really good for that because I had an amazing team of students that I worked alongside. This is only a tiny sample of the work that the students produced. This isn't their student work, this is, or some of it's not. It's their later, most of it's their later work. On the top left-hand side, there's a photographer called Ori Gersh. He was in the Twilight exhibition at the V&A alongside the person to the right, Christelle Abbas. Ori was the student rep at the time and a photographer. On the right side, Christelle Abbas was in my class. On the bottom left-hand side, we have an image by Hannah Starkey. Again, a name if you're not familiar with, well worth looking at. And on the bottom right-hand side, we have Tom Hunter. So working alongside these sort of people was really, really inspirational and certainly gets you sort of more motivated. So as a group, I think you lot are quite closely knit and seem to be working quite well together from what I can tell so far. But if you continue working in that way, you can actually really feed off each other. You can learn a lot from what you're doing, equally as much as the staff. And all of these people, if you don't know them, are very, very established artists and photographers now.